All right. Well, I think we'll aim to keep reasonably to time. So I think we shall make a start. There's still a few people joining as we go along. So, welcome everyone to this second in Regen's Leading the Energy Transition webinar series. Today with Nigel Topping. Many thanks to Nigel for joining. I'm Merlin Hyman, I'm Chief Exec of Regen, so I'm going to be your kind of, I'm going to be the John Humphreys today.
Oh, well, suddenly I have another appointment.
I'm going to, so I'll be sort of chairing today. And I'm broadcasting from Bath. You can see the traditional book background. Nigel's gone with the books as well, I think. For those who have been on some of our previous webinars, I apologise, I still haven't tidied my bookshelf. But, doesn't
and you still haven't shaved since lockdown either.
But you know, you've got to make some advantages of this, haven't you? So this series of webinars aims to look at some of the bigger questions in the zero carbon transition. Regen and our membership spend a lot of time, if you like, at the front line, working on the kind of details of making.
You've gone mute, Merlin.
So if that's not coming across well.
That's better.
We've launched today a paper on storage, actually looking at some of the detailed issues for that particular technology. So we're spending a lot of our time on some of those details, but this series is aimed to sort of look at some of the bigger challenges. So our first session was with Fintan Sly, it's still available on our website, who is the Director of the Electricity System Operator. And we're asking the fairly the important and I guess fairly central question of with Fintan of how do you run a zero carbon energy system and make it safe, secure and resilient. So this time we're aiming to kind of perhaps raise our sights up a little bit higher in terms of the kind of topics we're thinking about into the kind of international effort to tackle climate change, the climate emergency, what's kind of going on in that whole process in this confusing time, I guess, and you know, how does that link to a lot of the people that we work with who are kind of perhaps more at the front line of whether in business or local authorities of trying to put in place climate emergency actions, projects, invest in new technologies, etc. So that's the kind of broad focus. And we couldn't have a better person to join us in that discussion than Nigel Topping. I'll let Nigel introduce himself but better than I in a minute, but background as a leading business executive, and then in recent years been a key kind of player in trying to bring a more positive business dialogue and to this whole agenda and a positive kind of business message to global leaders on climate change. And of course, most importantly, was a director of Regen for 3 years. So thank you for that, Nigel.
I think 6 years, Merlin. It just felt like 3.
Okay. So quickly. So, Nigel, let's just, how's your lockdown been? Let's just.
I mean, I'm in Totnes, and you know, my lockdown has been fine for me. I'm feeling very, very blessed to not be having to dealing with some of the really very tough stresses of, you know, I don't have kids. So my wife and I don't have kids coming home from school, which making that difficult. I'm not facing unemployment or having to let people go, and I don't have anyone that, in close family infected. So and I'm very used to working from home. So for me, mainly it's meant sleeping more and traveling less. Of course, it's created a lot of uncertainty around my actual role and the timeline to COP, but we have clarity, emerging clarity now. So yeah.
Emerging clarity. Okay, well, we'll come to that. Let's just start with the title: High-Level Climate Change Action Champion, UN. UK. You want to explain for everyone what that means?
Yes. So the role was actually created in Paris. So in Paris, of course, we achieved the Paris Agreement. But one of the reasons that we were able to get 196 countries to agree to that momentous treaty was that the business community, the investor community, cities, states and regions, what the UN system sometimes calls non-state actors, in other words, people who are not parties to the UN Convention, or non-party stakeholders, but real actor economies, people with real skin in the game and real power to do something, were mobilized. As you say, I was with We Mean Business then, but there were similar coalitions with investors. So the role was created to work with those communities a lot. So the very complicated multilateral process with all of the negotiations keeps running. We have a rotating presidency, so that currently a Chilean presidency in Glasgow. UK takes over the presidency. But then alongside that, the champion's role was created to work with the non-state community to push everyone to be more ambitious, to get on with action, and then to use that momentum to support countries to be more ambitious. So I work with Gonzalo Munoz, who's my colleague from Chile, who was appointed about just over a year ago, and he'll work until the COP in Glasgow, and then I'll continue until COP27, which will be in Africa. And so in that year, I'll be working with an African champion who's yet to be appointed.
Okay, so are you working, obviously trying to mobilize, as you put, non-state actors. I'll put that on my business card in future, a non-state actor. Are you working a lot, with the UN, with other governments, with the UK government, or is it, how independent is it, and how much are you?
Well, yeah. So the mandate comes from the UNFCCC parties. So the role was created by those countries saying, we want each presidency to appoint someone as a champion to do this work. So the mandate comes from all the parties. I'm appointed by the UK government because as the incoming president, but I'm not a spokesperson for the UK government. I'm not a member of the UK government, obviously. So my main stakeholder community is businesses, investors, cities, states and regions, and all the coalitions and organizations convening those actors to accelerate climate action. But of course, I've got, I'm making sure we're aligned with what the UK's plans are for the COP, and with the UNFCCC Secretariat, and with the Chileans, and with the Secretary General's team. So it's sort of a bit of, mainly working with businesses, investors and cities, but making sure we're aligned and trying to inspire all those other actors actually with just how much momentum there is and much leadership there is in the community that we're working
hopefully
with.
Some of that inspiration will come out today. And on that note, I guess there's been a lot of discussion, sort of language around green recovery and the like, but also some perhaps concerning signs of a bit of a lack of leadership, perhaps across the world. And we saw Gordon Brown talking today about lack of yesterday about lack of sort of G20 leadership. So I just wondered, what's the most? Could you give us kind of one thing that's really uplifted you in the last month or so, and one thing perhaps that's particularly concerning you?
Well, I mean, one of the things that uplifted me is, for example, the way that the French government has tied some of the bailout money to green conditions, particularly with Air France. There's been some very intelligent, linking to very clear decarbonisation objectives and sort of market making objectives. So they've mandated 2% sustainable aviation fuel by 2025. Doesn't sound like much, but we know sustainable aviation fuel is one of the key technologies to decarbonise flying, and currently globally we're at 0.01%. So getting from 0.01 to 2% is a 200x in 5 years. That's significant. And if every government, every airport, every airline in the world did that, well, then would be on the S curve to decarbonise. Because that's a big infrastructural shift in that sector. So that's something that's really encouraged me. What discourages me? Well, the sort of political distractions of trade posturing.
Okay. So just on the this kind of green recovery discussion, we've seen some positive messaging from various governments. You've mentioned the French and the EU. I'm kind of wondering where you see potential leadership coming from in that, in making this sort of the building back better, the kind of not going back to where we did before, the tying all the investment that public authorities are putting into the economy and to try and jobs for young people to a green recovery. Given that there are also some, counter kind of wins, if you like, to that process with, and we could perhaps come to some of what those are. But where could leadership come from? Where are you hoping it's come from? What are you doing to try and encourage it to come forward?
Well, I think I mean, there's sort of thought leadership, and then there's policy leadership. Right? The policy leadership is going to have to come from policymakers. One thing it's always worth remembering that not all policy is made by national governments, and sometimes local governments have the powers and the freedom to be quicker. Also, so like the mayor of Paris basically banning combustion engines by 2030. Right, that basically means. I mean, if you're a Parisian, it's game over, right? Why would you buy a car now? Because that car is going to outlive its legal right to operate within your city. So I think we see it from all levels of government. That's the first thing. I see it from businesses. Again, it's a bit. I worked in the automotive industry for a long time, so it's my pet topic. National Express, right? They've already bought their last diesel bus. Right, so whilst we're talking about when will governments phase out internal combustion engines, National Express have already decided that all the lease plan, nearly 2 million cars, they've already decided it'll be by 2030. So I think leadership can come from everywhere. I mean, policy leadership in terms of a clean recovery, looks like it will come from the UK and Europe, but it's still early days, right? We've still got a health crisis and a very short-term, immediate economic crisis So I think a lot of political leaders are, understandably and rightly, right now more worried about how to avoid, a deep depression. So I think it'll be. So I think that's the phase we're in now. How do we keep doors open, and how do we keep jobs alive? So I think it'll be in the next 3 to 9 months that we really see the long-term, not so much the emergency sort of first aid measures, but the growing back, the building back better, whichever phrase you want to use. And there'll be other. I mean, there'll be other countries like New Zealand and Chile, and maybe, South Korea is interesting. Like they've just newly elected government on a net zero manifesto, but maybe wobbling a bit on some overseas coal financing, but could, so I think it's a little bit early to tell. And again, in the States, obviously we've got an election coming up, so. Depending on the outcome of that, we could see a complete reversal of federal approach to climate change. But again, remember, there's a lot of states like California, which is the 5th biggest economy in the world, that are already really on the front foot. So I would look for leadership wherever you can get it, because it'll be a curate's egg, I think, as normal.
Okay, and we have seen some people using the crisis to argue against environmental targets. You picked up the car industry. The German car industry, I think, has been quoted as lobbying for lower CO2 standards to make it easier for them to recover in this. Do you see that emerging as a kind of strong dynamic? Or?
Well, I think you've always got to be careful when you say the German car industry, because you haven't heard Daimler, BMW, or Volkswagen. You might have heard VDR, the trade body. And so, I mean, I think Ola Källenius, the CEO of Daimler, came out very early on, like over a month ago, in his blog, really arguing strongly that there should be a clean recovery and accelerate the transition. Obviously, it's different if you're manufacturing spark plugs, right, than if you're manufacturing cars, because there's no future for spark plugs, but there is a future for cars. So generally speaking, I think we do have a problem with a lot of trade bodies not really representing the best long-term interests of their members, and we're starting to see a shift in that. I mean, you've seen that in Europe with Euroelectric, right, with a very much kind of really being on the front foot and pushing for ambitious renewables and electrification now in a way that they wouldn't 5 years ago. And so even in cement, which has been one of the most sort of difficult to budge industries, we now have a global cement and concrete association that's working on a net zero pathway, for an industry whose very production process produces greenhouse gases. So I think that argument will always be there. It's also a political argument. It's kind of current jobs versus future jobs, right? And it's in Germany, which has done a lot of good things. They've got a coal phase out date of 2038. That's really a just transition challenge of lignite miners. So I think that tension, but that's a short-term, long-term tension. I mean, I think all the macroeconomic arguments and all the job creation arguments have really been won. So that's a political challenge.
Okay. And in terms of the UK, I mean, we heard, I think, on the 28th of April, some in the part of the Petersburg climate dialogue, which I'm sure you're all over. Alex Sharma talk about sort of green recovery a bit. Our teams will work night and day to raise ambition on climate change. So that includes your nights as well, Nigel, but being spoken for there. But we haven't heard much since then, sort of perhaps over a month ago. So are you hoping for more kind of leadership on that from the UK government?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll see more. I mean, I think the Climate Change Committee they've got a really important role in their next sort of carbon budget recommendations. The timing for everybody's been thrown, right, because so many people are having to work on the short term. So I'm sure that over the summer the timing will emerge, and as long as we don't have a second spike. But I don't know. I bet a lot of the people on the call are dealing with existential issues of keeping businesses running and furloughing employees. So I do have quite a lot of sympathy for ministers who are dealing with that. I mean, obviously, I'm 100% focused on climate, right? So I'd like to see more ambitious everything tomorrow. But I also realise that there are other issues, right? And hopefully we're past the worst of the health issues now and on a good track. But I think we're not past the worst of the economic issues, right?
Okay, so you talked about clarity, and you're obviously important as part of the COP26 process. So just you promised clarity, Nigel. So that was delayed. Do we have a firm date now for that?
Yeah. So it's a complicated process, as always with multilateral. The decision is actually made by something called the COP Bureau, which is 11 country representatives representing all the sort of nearly 200 countries who are in the UNFCCC. So they met last week on the 28th and agreed a delay to the 1st to the 12th of November next year.
Okay.
So that's when the COP will be now. Not all of the interim events and dates are clear yet, but now that we've got that anchored, I think over the next month the sort of the roadmap, because there are other sort of negotiating events, and there are other events that Gonzalo and I have to run in Africa and the Caribbean and the Middle East and stuff. So I think all that sort of clarity of timetable will emerge now we've got the dates anchored.
Okay, so on one hand, this is we've got the most important, what's been called the most important decade in human history by I think people like Christiana Figueres around Paris, and urgency, need to get on with it. And a year's delay, I guess, might not seem great in that context. On the other hand, perhaps the UK, for various reasons, wasn't quite as far ahead as it might have hoped to be. And you must be part of you that's thinking another year isn't such a bad thing. So is this how are you feeling about that? Positive or negative, I guess? I
mean, it's a mixed blessing, I think, for the obvious reasons, right? I mean, there's a risk of losing momentum. There's an opportunity to build more momentum. So, I mean, I think, but it's a given now. So I'm looking for the opportunity. I mean, I only started at the beginning of February, so it's a pretty short time to get a team together and make any difference in 9 months. So having an extra 12 months for me and my team and the community working to really raise ambition from the non-sector community is an asset, right? So I think we'll have to get better mobilised and have a lot more people demonstrating to governments that zero is happening and accelerating, and that raising ambition everywhere.
Okay, and so just zeroing in on kind of COP26 a bit, and our European, what does that what would success look like? I guess what really needs to come out of this iteration of international climate change?
So it's just worth explaining what COP is and isn't a little bit, actually, because sometimes it's misreported as when the world's governments come together to renegotiate climate treaty. That's not going to happen. So Paris was the big treaty negotiation, right? The Paris Agreement is the framework now for set the long-term goals and for raising it. So there's kind of two things happening in parallel. One is there are still some bits of the Paris rule book which need finalising, they need negotiating. There's one which we were hoping would be fixed in Madrid in December at COP25. It's Article 6. It's about international carbon trading, and that wasn't. So there are some bits like that need finalising. And that's important for the kind of integrity of the process and the multilateral confidence in it. There are some commitments which countries have made, particularly around financing for adaptation in emerging and least developed countries and small island states. So there's a famous 100 billion figure per year by 2020. So demonstrating progress on that and delivering that is crucial. And then there's the requirement for countries to set plans and then to ratchet their ambition every 5 years. So and then there's all the non-state actor work that I'm involved in. Of course, they all interact. So, but there's not that much to be negotiated. It's really important, right, that it is negotiated and finalised. But the other two big things are, what are countries doing to raise their ambition, and what is the real economy doing to raise its ambition, and how does this sort of ambition feedback loop work, so that by the time we get to Glasgow, we've got significantly more ambition and demonstration and momentum in the real economy.
And that demonstration, I again don't want to introduce any more jargon, but the nationally determined NDCs, each country's kind of contributions. I guess, is that what you're hoping people will turn up in Glasgow and with their whiskey, they'll pop down their ratcheted up.
Well, actually, no. Most of that will be delivered way before Glasgow. So some countries have already delivered their new NDCs. Many of them will do so by the end of the year, which is the original deadline. I think some realistically will slip now because their whole government's been preoccupied for several months. So some of them may be slipping to Q1 or Q2 next year. There'll be very few who turn up. And in Paris, there were people literally plonking things on the desk during Paris. That was the first time. So that's why it's really important that, good example would be Japan, right? Japan has already submitted its revised NDC. It's really disappointing. Japan is still building and financing coal-fired power, but they have an energy strategy review next year. So this is an example where they almost certainly would not have revised upwards their NDC from the one they've just submitted by Glasgow this year, but there's a strong possibility and hope that they will be able to, because they're fundamentally reviewing their energy strategy in the period between now and the delayed COP. So the NDCs will be really important to watch, but there are other markers of movement in the real economy as well. I mean, sometimes not every policy is covered in an NDC. So for example, the UK hasn't yet upped its NDC, but it has said it will bring forward the ICE phase-out date from 2040 to at least 2035. So there are other signals that governments can make, and of course there are many signals that cities and businesses and investors can make as well. One thing we'll be trying to do is land a lot more of that sense of full sectoral decarbonisation in Glasgow by having sort of much more dialogues between businesses along the value chain, investors in the value chain, local government leaders and line ministers. Historically, it's been environment ministers only who go to the COPs. So, but if you want to have a conversation about decarbonising transport, you need to have transport ministers, right? Or decarbonising agriculture, you need to have agriculture ministers. So we'll try and have a lot more of that.
Okay. So when you have your single malt at the end of up in Glasgow at the end of the process, and hopefully congratulate yourselves on the job well done. What do you think? Is there a key marker or something you think? Yes, we achieved that. That makes me feel. That was.
I mean, it's interesting. In Paris, right, what was delivered was an overall agreement and a set of country plans which added up to significantly over 3 degrees of warming. So we could have decided that Paris was a failure because it didn't deliver a below 2 degree pathway. But we decided Paris was a success because the test we set was that we can all agree on a framework. So I think it's a bit similar in Glasgow, but a bit more granular. So success will be if we all come out of Glasgow believing that we've made significant momentum. So if, let's say the assessment was we're on a 3.2 degree trajectory, if we're on a 2.3 trajectory, and that momentum is accelerating. So there's not one single negotiated document that everyone agrees, which makes it more complicated. So it's going to be more up to us to decide. So for me, it will the overwhelming marker of success will be that we actually believe that we have turned the corner, and we believe in ourselves and our ability to limit warming to well below 2 degrees and to get to net zero by 2050 or in the 2040s, as I prefer to say. And the evidence of that will be significant enhancement of NDCs, but not all of them. just politically, I think we know that they won't all be enhanced. And very significant evidence of enhanced ambition from all the non-state actors, so that cycle of ratcheting and accelerating ambition is visible and seen to be in progress.
Okay, and just thinking about where we're at and the kind of UK government. Obviously, there's a lot of, you mentioned a lot of other things worrying governments at the moment, and the UK still has Brexit to kind of as a top priority. You know, do you feel there's enough political capital and focus now starting to come into this process? I mean, really, given your role, we may be a little careful about what you say about that. But
I mean, I think
we all know that the French put a huge amount of effort and political capital into getting Paris.
Yeah. Well, I think there are plenty of governments to worry about in terms of lack of evidence of ambition, and for me, the UK is not one. And this is the hardest political job to pull off in the decade. I think getting Glasgow to be a success, given the political headwinds and now the COVID headwinds. I think the UK government's thrown a lot of resource at it. It's got its very skillful diplomatic corps mobilized. Obviously, that's difficult. You can't travel to China and sit down, right? But the conversations are still going on. And I think it's very clear to everybody, and that's why you hear the kind of language that you heard in Petersburg dialogues, that the UK is committed to delivering a domestic climate agenda and an international climate agenda as key parts of its leadership of the COP process.
Okay.
So I think that as bandwidth starts to free up, I'd be confident that the signals get stronger. So yeah.
Okay. To sort of dive into how these international negotiations kind of feed through to sort of investment decisions in the real world, which I guess is where your particular focus and background is. Just one brief more thing about the kind of language that people are using, and people have been searching, building back better. You mentioned green recovery. I've seen quite a lot of language used now around sort of healthier energy, or I think the German environment minister used the phrase, we already know the vaccines for climate change, unlike coronavirus. I just wonder if that's a helpful language for us to use, whether you think we'll see more of that. And it might be language, maybe it's a slightly kind of, it's obviously not a first order question, but it does perhaps matter how we pitch these, how we engage and discuss these topics in a kind of considered, a thoughtful way that's also aware of the pain that a lot of people are going through.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that COVID changes the framing and the language that will be used. I don't think people will use the word green very much. They might. Clean and healthy are much more resonant. Green is politicized. I mean, it's not. It's if you want to engage broad political support in the States, it's not a good idea to start with the Green New Deal. That's clearly like from one end of the political spectrum. So I think you've got to be smart and look for the center ground. So clean, healthy, resilient. Jobs is obviously going to be a huge issue. I see some comments around retrofit. I mean, we all know that there's a massive job opportunity, as well as improving the value of our physical assets and reducing the cost of running them in the long run, making them safer for granny and granddad at home if they have a warmer property. So there's a health premium as well. So I think health and resilience, it's already something it's really been shown right around the world that where we have more extremes of inequality. So I think this is quite a significant reframing of a lot of policy thinking anyway, and that definitely affects climate. So health and jobs, I think, will really be at the heart of the arguments around a clean, resilient recovery. Okay,
and just thinking, I think it is possible for those maybe at the front line. You're trying to, we've launched a paper on storage today. You're there trying to finance a storage project, planning permission, etc., to sort of look at all the international climate negotiations and COP26 and think, well, I'm sure it's important, but I can't quite see how it's really affecting, me. I'm more interested in is how much are they going to charge me to connect to the local network. More thoughts about how this process of kind of feeds through, if you like, or becomes a virtuous circle as we set
Yeah.
priorities and ambitions, and then those actually lead to concrete targets, policies, etc. in the UK. I mean, there's definitely a feeling within the UK energy sector that the government has declared a very bold zero carbon goal, but the plan to implement that is still sort of outstanding, I guess, in the to-do box. It's some really good individual bits, but no real comprehensive plan to meet that kind of scale of commitment.
Well, I think there's sort of two different levels of dynamic. Then there's the international one, and as I said, most of the game now is national, right? It's about national policies, and I think there's really important arguments to be made around national competitiveness, right? So it's not just about fulfilling Paris commitments, but it's around do you want to have the business sector who's learned how to build or retrofit houses, net zero houses, or to build the infrastructure and the components for electric vehicles, right? Because those are massive global markets. I think there's also the question about do you want to be re-elected, right? Because increasingly we're seeing the sort of on the streets and in school playgrounds just the levels of frustration and annoyance. So turning promises into credible action is going to be really key. All right, so I think for your members looking at the international engagement, there's probably very little that your storage company can and wants to do with regards to the intricacies of Article 6.2 on international carbon trading, right? I think that might be a waste of time, because unless you're involved in international carbon trading, why would you get involved? I think that so the work that you do in working with the members to help advise government policymakers on the granular, gritty reality of making the transition happen on the ground is a crucial role, right? It's really hard for governments, that, Merlin, that's been your bread and butter, right? It's hard for them to understand these really complicated, and sometimes the voice of the trade bodies is very loud, right? And so I think your work's really, really important in channeling the pragmatic understanding of change agents, who all your members are, into what policy will help accelerate the transition versus slow it down. I mean, in terms of the overall dynamics, the one thing that everybody can do is to be very clearly committed to net zero themselves as a business or as a city, because that does change the politics, right? If so we're actually launching on Friday something we call the Race to Zero, which we already have hundreds of businesses and cities, but we're trying to make that tens of thousands by the time we get to Glasgow, because that political signal, which is a bit amorphous, does affect. You never know exactly how, just as you never know who got the CEO to change. Was it the 15-year-old son or daughter who said, "Mummy, what are you doing about climate change?" Or was it impending policy change? Or was it a question from an investor? So yeah. I think I would encourage everyone to focus on the sort of specific policy questions affecting them and where people like you can help, and then also the macro of like sending a very strong signal that this is happening, it's good for the economy, it's good for jobs, and the faster it happens, the better it is for society.
So just you gave us a little bit of an insight there in the sort of tactics and approaches you're using to build kind of pressure from non-state actors. You just give us a little bit more sense of how that might work, how you could see that coming together and starting to have an influence.
So let me give a very concrete example. Which government around the world has committed to phasing out the use of combustion engine trucks?
Combustion engine trucks.
Name one.
I don't know. I haven't come across any.
There you go. Okay. So I don't know one either. All right. But Mercedes trucks have committed to being net zero in 2039 in Europe, North America, and Japan. They're three biggest markets. So why haven't USA, UK, and Japan committed to phasing out? Because the market's ahead of them, right? So the approach that we take really is to be very systemic and say what are the signals of change and who can ratchet up. So that means looking at what civil society is doing, what investors are doing, what cities are doing, what national governments are doing, what the key actors in the value chain are doing, what trade bodies are doing, who's accelerating, who's braking.
Yeah.
if you like. So I would assert that it is entirely plausible that the whole world, that we could see the last sale of an internal combustion engine heavy truck by 2039, because the inventor of the internal combustion engine has said we can do it, right? And we're committed to doing it. So, and I would use that, and then things like, and so whenever if I talk to a transport minister, I'll say, by the way, why are you slower than the leader in the industry, or why are you slower than the mayor of Paris or the mayor of Bogota? Or why are you not delivering what the next generation are asking for? So the pressure for change is coming from everyone. We know the technology pathways, right? And when we get more and more people committing to those technology pathways, we get down the cost curve much faster. So in this case, it's it's hydrogen and fuel cells for heavy vehicle freight, and we know it's battery electrics for kind of urban delivery. So
Okay,
there
was a specific question about technology for buses. Is that the answer for them? Actually, I just noticing as well, hydrogen cells or.
Well, it depends on the usage cycle, right? So I think urban, it looks like the technology is already locked in at batteries, but intercity, it's probably going to be fuel cells. I mean, generally speaking, everyone I speak to in the automotive sector is clear that we're probably going to have both those technologies, and exactly where the crossover point will depend on the kind of the usage cycle.
Okay, so we talked a bit about how kind of non-state actors can have an influence, and particularly perhaps big business. You talked about the kind of perhaps a lot of people on this call being change agents, maybe at a very local level, or building renewable energy projects. Is there, I mean, is the answer for them just get on and do that and you're doing your bit, or is there more they can do to help you, and in the run up to COP26?
Look, I'm very aware running a small business is challenging at the best of times, and I know not all your members are small businesses, but a lot of them are. And running a small business in the current moment is probably the most challenging. I have, my heart really goes out to all those business owners and managers trying to stay alive at the moment. So my advice would be, don't worry too much about COP. You've probably got more important things to worry about right now. But as you emerge and you get back to some form of business as usual, which I hope is accelerated by commitment to a clean recovery, right? I mean, I hope that there is a sort of a clean pot of gold at the end of the COVID rainbow for your members. It's using your voice in every forum. So using through your work with Regen, asking your suppliers, asking your customers. Make sure that you know and I'm sure most of your members do, and I know you help them with that. What is the pathway to zero in each sector that they're working in? Increasingly, there'll be an opportunity to, I think, in quite an easy way, just to lend your voice to that momentum by committing to zero yourselves. I know the International Chambers of Commerce and CBI and others are all looking at providing ways for SMEs to commit. In fact, the Science Based Targets Initiative, which has been the sort of the biggest initiative for major companies, for multinational companies to commit, have got a pathway for SMEs now. So, we should have tens of thousands of UK companies making it clear that they're committed to net zero by 2050. And of course, if you're a UK SME who only operates in the UK, then you're already committed to net zero 2050 by law, by the government. So you might think about committing to 2045 or 2040.
Okay, and that political action and engaging with MPs, we've seen relatively little of I think of our sector probably actually building relationships with their local MPs, showing them projects, showing them where jobs are going on. Is that a kind of?
I mean, I think usually, like I say, use your voice everywhere. I think there's a general understanding that SMEs are the engine of growth and change in an economy, but often their voice is underplayed. So there's never harm in going to speak to your MP and telling them what you're doing, what you're excited about, what you want from them and from the government. And I'm sure you can provide some tips on the top 3 or 4 things to ask for, Merlin.
Yes. Okay. Just think a bit about and to come more towards the end about the kind of speed of change that's possible. Nigel, you've been quite eloquent about kind of how once change takes place in a sector, it can start to happen very quickly. We've become unfortunately familiar, I guess, with exponential change.
Yeah, I mean,
what's your feeling about the?
Well, actually, of course, in the renewable sector, we've experienced really fast change and then rapid halts, right? So I would think maybe if there's one thing that I would encourage every single change agent to say to policymakers is give us some long-term stability of policy, right? So we don't, because that we all know the damage of U-turns or stuttering. Which is why I think setting zero dates on everything is really helpful. Like we've seen the power of both the commitment to coal phase out in terms of a date and the floor price in terms of is it 50 plus days now we've been without coal in this country, right? So and the dates come forward by 1 year to 2024, but it's effectively there now, right? I mean, so we've effectively, by setting the clear zero, we've got there effectively 5 years early, really. I think a lot about exponential change, because if you look at the history of industrial transformation, it always happens along S curves. It's never a straight line. So, and S curves are very difficult to spot. So that's why the only challenge is to invest neither too soon nor too late, because too soon and you lose, and too late and you can never catch up. So it's a sort of easy thing to say, but that's why I always think we should look much more at doubling rates and growth rates of individual technologies and their market adoption rather than the absolute. So if somebody says to me, no, EVs are only at 3%, I'm like, yeah, but they were at 1.5% 18 months ago. So if that carries on, 6, 12, 24, 48, 96, game over in 5 doublings. So I think, and I think in some sectors we can start to see that that momentum building. In other cases where we haven't necessarily got the chosen technology hasn't locked in, like cement and steel will be good examples where there's maybe more help needed from government to get through the kind of valley of death in terms of the early stage R&D. But I think in terms of EVs, hydrogen, and EVs and renewables, right, it's just a question of deployment at scale.
Okay. Some of the questions coming in from the audience around, still a very positive macro message, UK government leadership toward UK government targets, but still finding the detailed arrangements for their sector, onshore wind being an example, they're being being pretty tough, planning policies tough, connecting to the net grid tough, subsidies kind of rare as hen's teeth. So I guess the thing is whether, having worked with this process and worked with a bit more closely with government now, whether and we've talked already a little bit about how we can kind of make the case or put some of the get a bit of traction into some of the detailed nitty-gritty issues. Are there ways of presenting those to policymakers and government at the moment that are going to be particularly successful?
Well, I think, I mean, you know more about this than I do, Merlin, but I would say a couple of things. One, I'll just be a bit wary about whinging about subsidies, because I think there's actually a bad track record in the industry of enjoying subsidies when they were needed and then trying to hang on to them when they weren't needed. And we need to be careful if the story is that renewables are more competitive than fossil fuels in many markets in the world. So we need to be very careful about being greedy about or lazy about asking for subsidies, particularly in an environment when the treasury in every country in the world is going to be more stressed than it's ever been in living memory, right? So I think we should be really looking for smart recommended policies which are not going to cost treasuries money, right? Because they're always going to be ones that are where the door is more likely to be held open. And then the other thing is to you need a kind of granular evidence. I mean, I've always been a big fan of the work that Regen has done in actually, I'm a real generalist, right? But you've got to have people who go deep and say, look, this is what's actually needed to unlock the market investment in storage or in renewable capacity. So I think making sure that I'll be very careful to go down any argument which says we need fiscal support. And sometimes I know it's needed. I mean, like, so in and you see some of that in the EU proposals, like around EVs, like recognizing that until you've got to cost parity, then fiscal support can be really helpful. But I think just being really careful about to argue that tightly and to be really clear that it needs to be phased out as soon as possible and as soon as it's needed. Yeah, that'd be my main advice: is be granular and try empathize with Treasury.
Okay, good. I actually we put in our press release around our storage paper today that there's a 9 gigawatt pipeline of storage projects, which could be unlocked without subsidies, and that's billions of pounds of investment in a sustainable energy.
Right. Well, I mean, that's a really powerful factoid. If you say how many billions and how many jobs are behind that, then suddenly you've got, I think, in any country, you've got politicians' attention, right?
Excellent. Okay. Now, just finish in terms of things that then are most kind of optimistic. I think maybe we probably all need that at the moment. I kind of given us some good examples already. Renewables is a good story, we know, of growth. Are there things that you want to kind of point people to that, to feel like the kind of some of the momentum perhaps we saw in this agenda in 2020, in 2019, and the net zero targets, and some just what you're experiencing out there, in working with countries and big businesses. We all know all the challenges with some of the political leadership at the moment out there, but what is it that should inspire us and give us confidence as we head into the most important decade in human history?
Well, I tell you, I think that in the boardroom of all the biggest companies in the world and all the biggest cities in the world, it's very clear that this transition is happening, and it's happening fast. And people are now deciding whether they're going to be on that exponential curve or wait and see. If you take a wait and see attitude to exponential change, you lose. You can never catch up. So people are now deciding whether they're going to win, and that's as policymakers, as investors, and as CEOs, or whether they're going to lose. Those who haven't framed it like that are the ones who are going to lose, because if you wait and see. The kind of momentum that we see in the real economy now was unthinkable even 2 years ago. We seem to really always focus on the gap between where we are and where we'd like to be, rather than the gulf between where we were and where we are now. When we came out of Paris in January 2016, the general expectation was that we'd still be building internal combustion engine cars into the 2070s. Looked at the IEA. Even now, Bloomberg New Energy Finance say we'll be at 54% by 2040, right? EV market share. But if you actually look at what car companies are saying, even what oil companies are saying, right? Internal combustion engine for cars is dead in the 2030s. I think the early 2030s, right? So basically, the future has come forward by 40 years in 4 years. And the same thing's true. Like, what's the, you and your members will be on top of what the UK commitment to offshore wind is now. It's like did you believe that would be so big 5 years ago? Maybe you dreamt of it.
We were optimists, Johnny's he's a believer.
Yeah. So, but most people would not have imagined that we'd have the kind of net zero commitment. No one would have believed that even 2 years ago, right? So much has changed. Now, of course, having a commitment is not the same as delivering on it, right? But the final thing I'd say to your point about is leverage that commitment. I mean, that is a legal commitment that we have to deliver on. So you can remind people of that as much as you like, and you're not in trouble. You're just pointing to the law. So I think that's what I think we really should look at, how much things have changed in the last 2 or 3 years. And if you start to extrapolate that rate of change, of course, that's our job, that's your job, that's your members' job, that's my job, is to keep pushing that momentum and accelerating.
Excellent. Well, Nigel, I think that's a brilliant note to end on. It'd be great to keep in touch with you, I think, as we go on this journey together towards COP as the next kind of key milestone. It's a key milestone to focus on in international climate change, but also perhaps green recovery.
Can I just give you one challenge, Merlin?
Go for it, Nigel.
How many members do you have?
We're on about 160, I think.
Right. So by this November, I give you the challenge to have every one of those to have publicly committed to their own net zero target.
Okay.
I mean, you're in the game of industrial disruption and energy transition. Yeah. So if you want to send a what should be an easy signal from all of you, put your money where your mouth is, sign up to net zero, and then we'll get that's another 160, and everyone counts, right? And when we tell policymakers that it's 10 or 100 or 1,000 companies, then that are committed to this, it makes a lot of difference. So that's your personal objective. I've just given you 160 by November.
Nigel, not on my board anymore, but it is a very good objective, and I'm pleased to see that Catalina from Zenobis already accepted that challenge. So you can sign up right now on the Zoom.
In fact, I'll give you a chance. Get 200 members to commit, so you've got a membership growth and a net zero target, all wrapped up in one. How about that?
Excellent. I really think if I don't end this webinar soon, I'm gonna work program for next year. It's going to keep accelerating. Just Nigel, as I said, thank you very much. It really only remains as well for me to thank everyone for participating. In terms of kind of what's coming next, we have a session mentioned today. We're launching a paper on the role of electricity storage in achieving a zero carbon electricity system, and we have another webinar on that. So I'll be back in front of my books tomorrow with this time a panel of a number of businesses, bays, etc., all talking about the future of storage. So you can sign up for that. We'll be running further sessions in this webinar series, and if Nigel doesn't object, we'll be putting this up on the website for anyone who missed it first time. I don't know if you want to check through for anything you didn't mean to say, Nigel.
No problem. Merlin, can I just say thank you to you and the team at Regen. I think the really important work that you do, and thanks to all your members for all of their commitment, and good luck to everybody in navigating the health and economic challenges in the coming months. And I hope that you will emerge stronger and a part of a global movement to really accelerate the move to a healthy and more resilient zero carbon economy. So I'll be checking in on your numbers in the run up to November. This November, right? Not next November.
This November. Excellent. Yeah. All right, Nigel. Once again, thank you very much. And as Nigel says, most of all, thank you for everyone for participating. All your thoughts and questions, which we've been keeping a close eye on. I guess at this point, I normally wish people in an event a safe journey home, but maybe we just wish you a safe journey to your kitchen for a couple of get on with your day. So finally, once again, thank you very much, Nigel. Thank you, everyone, for participating, and we will see you shortly.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.